Alright, we're going to keep going with the next part of the outline. This shouldn't take too long, but I always like to present this particular one. If you look at part A here, there, and it says those numbers equals, you can probably pretty quickly add up those numbers and get 125, right? 100 plus 25. But the question is, how did you really figure that out? So I wanted to kind of elaborate on steps of processing. And for those of you who had me for other classes, you've seen this before. So what are the steps that allow you to answer that question? Well, the way it works in terms of neuroscience is the following. The first thing that happens is light from that stimulus hits your eyes, hits the sensory receptors. And the light hits the sensory receptors, the rods and cones in your retina. And actually what happens in there is that light is converted into electrochemical energy. Neurons convert that energy into what's called action potentials, and that electrochemical energy, basically the connections from neuron to neuron go all the way up to your brain. When they get to your brain, suddenly you have what's called perception. You perceive what those stimuli are. That's kind of that mind-body thing, right? Because now you've got the body with the neurons working really well, and suddenly you perceive something. Perceiving is a mental state. After you perceive something, then you have what we call mental processing. Not only do you perceive what those stimulus are, but you are able to process and figure out that the plus sign in the middle means add those two up. You're able to remember and use your memory processes, and then you're able to actually do a mental computation, add those two things up, and then in your mind, these are all mental and kind of cognitive steps, you're able to get an answer of 125, and then after you get that mentally, then you're able to send the signal back down the neurons to where it goes to your mouth, and a motor program is sent telling you to say 100 plus 25. So you have the stimulus, which is the information there. You have the response, which is 125. And that stuff in the middle, the neurons working, the signals going up to your brain, and then the signals coming back once your brain gets the answers. That's kind of the neuroscience part of it. Parts of the neuron. Parts is parts. Page 39. 3 key parts of the neuron. You can look at that picture. We've got the dendrites. They collect the electricity. They're kind of the receivers. The dendrites collect electricity. They are summated in the cell body, or the nucleus, if you will. And then if you get enough electricity, the signal is sent down the axon. So those are the key parts of the neuron. And basically what happens is when information gets to the end of the axon, there is a little gap called the synapse. And after the synapse, you have a new neuron, the new dendrite of the new neuron. And that kind of stuff happens all the way up, going up to the brain. If you look on page 40 and 41, we got a few other things to share with you here. Looks like on page 40, they got a lot of terms here. We don't need to know all of them. That type of connection I just described, where an axon goes to a synapse and then to the next dendrite, that's called an axodendritic synapse. That's where you have the axon coming down to the end. There's a little gap. That's called the synapse, and then the dendrite of a new neuron coming there. You don't need to know all these different types of synaptic things. Let's see what we put here next. This is still kind of background stuff that I figure I ought to talk to you about. A couple of types of neurons. We have sensory neurons. I think it says that's somewhere in here. Sensory neurons, basically when that light energy comes in, if you're looking at the stimulus, the first neuron that they hit is called the sensory neuron. That actually transforms the electricity or the light energy into electricity. So it's going up to the brain, the first neuron. The motor neuron is information right at the end of the process, so that when you perceive 100 plus 25 and you're about to say it, the motor neuron is the last neuron before the muscle moves. And then anything in between that, which is just about everything, is called a interneuron. Sorry, I was going to say something else there, an interneuron. Page 41, one of my most interesting terms that I put here for D, dendritic arborization. Many times, if you have a lot of experience with things, dendrites can really branch out And that picture of the Purkinje cell in the cerebellum is what we call dendritic arborization. If you remember what the cerebellum controls? Motoric function. Let's say you're a figure skater and you're very, very good. You have to have very good fine motor coordination, leg coordination. Maybe your brain really develops here so that you can actually do all these activities and you have all these neurons developing. So that's dendritic arborization. So that kind of closes that part of the equation, the general steps I went over with A. And I think that's about all I have to say about that. Your book has a lot of other information in that chapter, but you know, I think we've got enough here. If you want to disagree, you can add more about the book, but I think that'll cover it. Thanks.